Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and this is the last gasp of Framed in September, a month-long booktube reading event to do with the arts in general. Your hosts are Bookins and Books, Heather Gregg, Hannah's Books, and Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. I haven't done quite as much as I wanted to do for this event this year, but that did include a failure. I started Vasari's Lives of the Artist. It was a little too dry and a little bit of a slog. I will complete it, but perhaps in my own sweet time rather than to deadline. So I did switch to a Penguin classic, Hans Holbein, The Dance of Death. This was a little bit revelatory to me. This takes a look at a side of Holbein, a section of his career which I was not aware of. I knew who Hans Holbein was. I remember once I went to a private showing of an exhibition at the Tate, very nice, all paid for, all corporate, of Hans Holbein and other artists, but it was mostly about the Holbein. That was fun. But I always knew him as the court painter for Henry VIII. This looks at his life beforehand, both in Augsburg and in Basel. Because it was in Augsburg, and because it was at the time, the correct time, I was able to revisit someone from a book I read for last year's non-fiction November, The Richest Man Who Ever Lived, Jacob Fugger. And it turns out there was actually a picture of Jacob Fugger later in this book, if I can find it, not by Holbein, but by Holbein's dad. His portrait there, Jacob Fugger, looking ever so happy to be the richest man in the world. But this book is taken up, the first half of it is taken up with reproductions of these woodcuts from, based on Holbein's original drawings. They may look a little bit simplistic, but what you have to appreciate, and what this book makes you appreciate, is that these reproductions are a lot bigger than the actual works would be. It has the actual size of a Holbein woodcut there, which makes that working very intricate and delicate indeed. That is no more than the size of a book of stamps, and it packs a lot of detail in. And some of the detail is great in these. I was aware of the Dance Macabre. I was aware of Memento Mori. And I think if I'd have been asked about it before and asked to cite an example of a Memento Mori in painting, I would have actually chosen Holbein. I would have chosen the Ambassadors, and that absolutely crazy, freaky, elongated skull on his masterwork, the Ambassadors. A shape that only reveals itself properly as a skull when looked at from the side. It is quite something to see in person. But here we have, I think there are 42 woodcuts. There were meant to be more. The actual guy who made the woodcuts died before he could complete them. But here we have an abbess being dragged off to death. The good and the great, the hypocritical people who are supposed to be the adults in charge are shown as being far too attached to their current lives, not fulfilling the responsibilities that their exalted positions put them in. So we have people who don't even seem oblivious to death being near them. The emperor, for example, There's one of a lady or a princess who just doesn't notice that death is walking amongst her ladies in waiting. There are others like the mendicant priest I just showed you, or the abbess, who are being dragged away screaming. But death, these skeletons, is implacable. And there is always, I'll tell a lie, not always, but often a reminder. So there are lots of visual clues. So here we have it. Always, nearly always, an hourglass, either showing the time is running out or fallen on its side and broken, meaning get your coat. It's lawyers, it's counts, it's merchants. I'm not too fussed about the fact that these people are meeting their demises, but this is showing that death is the great leveler, and that means it is going to take everyone, and some of them can actually be quite affecting. This one, for example, the ploughman. He looks impoverished. I think we're meant to take from his state versus the land he is ploughing that this is not his land. He is a peasant, he's doing this for someone else, and he has been worked quite literally to death. But here, death is not dragging the ploughman away. He's helping the ploughman drive the horses on. The horses, yes, driving the horses on, rather than taking it out on the ploughman. But where he's actually taking him to is this very sort of heavenly representation at the top of the piece. Contrast how death is treating this vainglorious knight. And contrast that with the way that he is helping along, almost in a kindly way, this old man. But the one that is difficult to stomach is the child. This looks like a family living in a hovel, living in poverty, and death is sparing no one. But he has the child by the hand. He's not dragging the child. The child obviously wants to stay, but death is not being malicious about it in a way that he or she seems to in some of the other works. But even so, the look of horror on the parents' faces, that's a lot to pack into a woodcut so big. The rest of the book, as I said, looks at the rest of his career. It does mention his fairly long and successful sojourn in the United Kingdom, but it talks a lot about his experiences in Augsburg, where he's being trained by his father, and then making his way in the world, introducing himself to the art world in Basel. And he chooses Basel because it is a great place for books. There's a lot of book decoration that goes on, a lot of publications that come out of Basel. But he does find himself having to go because there is not the work there for him, with the increased influence of Protestantism and the iconoclast beliefs that come along with the more radical interpretations of that. There's not a lot of call for painters to produce biblical works, which was bread and butter for Holbein and a number of other artists. And he goes initially to United Kingdom only for I think 18 months or so. I think he actually gets Erasmus to introduce him to someone that he can work for. And he goes there and he makes some money and he moves back to Basel, buys a house, and for the next month gets almost no work at all and has to eventually go back to the United Kingdom to make his fame and fortune. But he gets so famous after his second visit that he is able to get work eventually on his final return to continental Europe. That is the graphic book content from 500 or more years ago. I'm going to contrast that from something from 2023, and I was contacted a couple of months ago by a producer or writer of a comic who asked if I would mind looking at and giving a review of the first 2 issues of their new comic. Now, I'm not normally a comics channel, obviously, but I knew, or at that point hoped, Framed in September was coming back, so I said yes, and here it is. It's a very brief review, but this is a very brief video. Stellarlands. The writer is Max Farada, artist Ben Worrell, colours Wilson Go, lettering SK, and the editor Katrina Ruetz. Now, I don't have the language to talk that much about comics. I've read some. I've read enough graphic novels. I have not one fraction of the knowledge of comics that a lot of commentators on BookTube have. So I'll be exposing my naivete here. So I'm just going to say that I really liked it. The first issue deals with an imminent invasion. So this is set on Earth, but Earth as part of a wider known universe which is inhabited. And hostile forces have taken over a remote moon and are in the midst of uncovering a secret base that holds the key to a delicate intergalactic alliance. And it is up to the main character of this issue, Anvil Lisa, to thwart the enemy plans. She is a superhero, but she's working for a government agency. She's supposed to be a little bit clandestine, and as one of her superiors tells her in her briefing, lose the cape. So she does. The shots of her flying to the remote moon to sort things out are brilliant, very colourful, very kinetic. On her arrival, she has a battle with some of the invading forces. She's also having to deal with the indigenous life forms, which have a Lovecraftian feel about them, big squid-like monsters. But she has more issues, or more troubles, dealing with 2 of the children of some of the allies that had been on that moon, who, having been abandoned by the authorities, aren't feeling too best pleased about it. Lisa is very able to get into a fight and defeat her enemies. Has much more issue trying to deal with people on a one-to-one basis. But where I think Stellarlands really takes off is in issue 2, when I think certainly my eyes are just opened to actually how big the scope of the ambition of this series is. We are not focusing on just this one hero, and in fact here they're not called heroes. They seem to be a bit of an evolutionary leap, which is a very old superhero trope, but they're called preternaturals or preters. They're very rare. They can hide amongst us because it's only when they start to display their powers that you know that anything is different. They don't look or sound any different to the rest of the people. In fact, there are aliens who look a lot more different than our preternatural heroes. But this new story has a completely different cast. It is in a completely different setting. There is a different set of issues. We have alien worlds, politics, we have time dilation problems, which I always love in science fiction. We have romance and we have social commentary. It is a much more satisfying, fully rounded, enclosed story, whereas the first one very much felt like an introduction to characters and style. This feels like an introduction to the universe of the comics, and I'd be interested to see what comes next from them. But yes, with that, their end of the art for September. I'm sure there will be art before the end of the year, but Framed in September, as usual, has been a blast. Everything from Holbein through to automatic writing, from comics through to just, playing a little bit of ambient music in the background. I've tried to incorporate a number of the different arts. I won't be doing a whole season on pottery, don't worry. Maybe I'll take up knitting, but that'll be for next year. Until then,